a really, really formidable side. I personally don't necessarily expect us to win.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Planet Soccer Show here on YouTube. I'm Reed, that's Dylan, and we're back to talk about something we haven't talked about before, and that is the United States women's national team. Obviously, the Women's World Cup going on over in Australia. Is it just Australia? It's just Australia, right? Or is it New Zealand too?
It's Australia and New Zealand. Yeah, we were in New Zealand for groups, and I think knockouts all in Australia, okay. But it was split for groups. I believe. I could very well be
haven't
as we may be a lot in this episode.
I haven't watched a whole lot of it because it's the timing is very, very strange, but we've kept up with it and done as much research as we possibly could. Dylan, I want to ask you something. I actually saw it talked about on the Men in Blazers episode with I forgot. I think it was Becky Sauerbrunn, maybe, with her. Yeah. They talked a little bit about there seems to be an element maybe in the United States of hoping that this team doesn't succeed. Do you feel that at all? And do you have any thoughts on it? There were some interesting points.
I was gonna say I didn't listen to that episode, so that's new to me, that like concept. I think there might be a little bit of, what was it? I think like 2007, they lost in the round of 16, I want to say, was the last time there was like a super disappointing World Cup. And we did gain a lot from that. So that's like my only theory on why people might be kind of feeling that way. It's like, all right, maybe we need a wake-up call here a little bit.
Yeah.
And it worked in the past, but I haven't really heard of that a lot. I know Carly Lloyd's comments. I'll dive into those a little bit after we kind of touch on the Portugal match, were a pretty hot button topic. Mm-hmm. And it did almost seem like she was not happy, but like, I don't know, there were some weird feelings in her little monologue there after the game. So I'm kind of curious to hear though, what you gathered from that Men in Blazers and why that might be kind of the case. Cause that's not something I've really felt a lot until you just mentioned it. I thought of Carly Lloyd maybe being seen that way, but that's kind of a new concept to me.
So, yeah, I mean, I'm not saying we feel this way, obviously, but you guys have to understand the U.S. women's national team is kind of polarizing in the United States with all their off the field stuff that, they've been lobbying for. And obviously with the former president of the United States and Megan Rapinoe going back and forth, him having a pretty polarizing base and her having pretty polarizing ideas. So I think there are just a lot of people, a lot of it is probably along the political lines of people just not wanting this team to succeed. Yeah. And a lot of the people who fall within that group probably don't really care about women's sports either. So it was just interesting because, you have U.S. soccer fans who want to see the women's team succeed, but definitely don't put any like personal or national worth into it. Like it's not, I don't feel some big embarrassment if the women's team doesn't win the World Cup. Especially, we'll get into it, but especially with the new parity that's in women's soccer. I don't know. They didn't get into it too much, but I'm sure there's articles out there about kind of how their off the field lobbying and activism has kind of created a similar divide that we see politics wise in America. So,
no, and I certainly get that. And like, very uncommon that I would agree with that spectrum of the American political system. But I think there are some kind of valid points that I've, at least personally on my Twitter and talking with friends, kind of agree with about the whole pay structure, and all of that.
Yeah, it's very nuanced.
So I definitely, I guess
lots of things that go into it.
Yeah. I guess I could certainly see that. I'm still, while I don't necessarily agree with some of their takes on the pay and the U.S. soccer system and where they fall, I might not necessarily agree with. But unlike you, I would actually be pretty embarrassed to see us drop out any sooner than, especially with the teams that have been knocked out, any sooner than like the semifinals. And that's nothing against Sweden. It's more a big picture. We're the number one team in the world.
Yeah. Sweden's number 3 though. So they're certainly not a joke, which we'll talk about
here in
a minute.
No, exactly. So yeah, I think you kind of touched on this, and we'll kind of start transitioning into this World Cup in particular. There's a lot more parity now. And I think Marta, the all-time goal-scoring leader in World Cup history, I think she's played in 6 World Cups now. After Brazil was knocked out, she had some really Yeah, after Brazil was knocked out, she had some really interesting comments surrounding the growth of the women's game. I saw a TikTok of the interview, fully translated, thankfully, because I do not speak Portuguese. But her biggest point was she growing up, obviously being older, she's played in 6 World Cups now, never had a female sports idol growing up at all. But now, whenever she's out in the streets, especially in Brazil, men, women, children, dads, mothers, regardless of if they have a young aspiring female athlete in the family, are kind of look up to her and feel a sense of pride in her in Brazil. And I think that's a huge statement in and of itself, that a soccer hungry country that puts all of this attention, finances, passion into the men's side is starting to see that on the women's side. And I think we're kind of seeing that across the globe. For the longest time, it was, Norway in the 90s, China in the 90s, the US, and then Germany started to catch on, and Brazil's always kind of been there, but we're seeing a lot more growth in the women's game, just like we're seeing a lot more growth in the men's game here in the United States. And it's certainly affected this World Cup. I mean, Brazil didn't advance out of the group, and that just feels wild. Brazil not advancing out of a World Cup group. I don't care what type of soccer competition it is. Brazil not advancing is wild. Germany not advancing after so many years of success.
The second ranked team
wild. So there is a lot more. Yeah, there is certainly a lot more parity right now, and I think we'll kind of dive into it a little bit as we recap the games and preview moving forward for the U.S. women's team in this knockout stage, what that is going to look like. And I think that is a super interesting dynamic. And you said, and I briefly said too, we're far from women's soccer experts.
Yeah.
I admittedly, I watch the tournaments, I watch the Olympics, I watch the Women's World Cup. I might catch like a random game here and there if it's on and I'm not doing anything. But it's certainly not appointment TV for either of us. So take everything we have here with a grain of salt. But I do think it is important to kind of recognize the women's game. And that's why this was a little bit of a passion project for me to try and at least dive in a little bit to the Women's World Cup, because I do think it has a lot to do with the expansion of the game, not only in the U.S., but worldwide as well.
Yeah, I think I remember watching the Euros, the Women's Euros last year now, and I think England winning that was really good for the sport, especially beating France or beating Germany in the semifinals and then France in the finals. I think that's correct. I didn't go.
I think they beat Sweden. It was either quarterfinals or semifinals, but they handled Sweden. Yeah. I do remember that.
The England team in this World Cup does have some important injuries, notably to their captain Leah Williamson, and some others as well. However, I do think they advanced out of their group, and it's a team that's had international success here recently. You see 2 African teams, or maybe even 3 African teams advancing out of their group into the knockout stages, which has never happened before. Morocco having a really good year, advancing to South Africa, and I think one other
as well. And there might have been one other. As I said, not following the tournament super closely. A lot of that has to do with the timing of games, like you said. But yeah, we are starting to see some African country success, like we've started to see in the men's side, and that's really cool to see.
And that's all.
Typically, it's been
go ahead.
Asia, the U.S., and a couple of European teams really dominating. So seeing it really expand, especially the women's game, women's athletics in general, really expanding is pretty cool.
Yeah, it isn't necessarily surprising either, seeing the focus that's been put on the women's club level. I know a lot of teams, notably Barcelona, Wolfsburg, a lot of clubs are starting to invest very, very heavily into their women's game, because there is money to be made there, and ultimately that's what it comes down to, is if there's money to be made there, then that will come to fruition. So I think it's it's kind of similar to what we saw in the Men's World Cup. There were some teams that got through that you knew were going to get through, some teams you knew were going to get through that didn't, and then some surprises also, which that's normally not the case in the Women's World Cup. It's normally pretty chalk, at least to a certain extent. So let's go ahead and start talking about what we've seen from the U.S. in this World Cup, with kind of the preface of saying that they were the odds-on favorite going for a three-peat World Cup, or going for a World Cup three-peat, I should say. And their first game kind of started like most teams' first World Cup games start. They're playing a lesser opponent. They dominated, but they didn't dominate as much as maybe they could have at the same time. Dylan, you have in here 28-0 on shots and 7-0 shots on goal. 10 big chances, 8 of them were missed. Sophia Smith with a really good game, 2 goals. And then one negative was Megan Rapinoe. Just did not look good on the field in that one. I have a lot of thoughts on Megan Rapinoe. I think she's obviously probably past her prime, and I think her either moving out of the women's national team or kind of retiring or whatever the case may be is going to be really a changing of the guard or a turn of the corner. You've seen it with Mia Hamm, Carly Lloyd, other star players like this who have kind of passed the torch in the past, and I think Megan Rapinoe will be one of those. And I've just seen a lot of her interviews. They just seem weird to me. She's talked about how cute their team is. They have the cutest team in the World Cup, which just seems like it's something weird to say. Like, it doesn't seem like a normal
as a player. That's really weird.
It doesn't seem as like a normal World Cup press conference would go. She hasn't seemed super focused. She seemed very, very, I don't want to say like overconfident, but just it seems like she's reveling in this moment more than trying to lead the youngsters, which obviously I'm not in training. I don't see what's going on. But she had a real stinker in the first game to kind of bring it back to the point. Dylan, other than the bullet points we have here, what did you see in that first one? And did it kind of give you a shade of what's to come a little bit from the group stage?
I think that's the biggest thing is, yes, come out with a 3-0 victory. Normally on paper, that's exciting in a World Cup opener. 28-0 in shots, like you said, 7-0 in shots on target. Like, that's all super exciting. 10 big chances, super exciting. But the thing that kind of sticks out is 8 big chances missed, and you really felt that when you were watching this game. This is one of the ones. As a precursor, I was able to watch Vietnam and Netherlands. As I said, Portugal match I did not watch live due to the time of the game. But the biggest thing for me is the lack of finishing that we saw. This is a game that in the past, no disrespect to Vietnam, they are number 32 in the world. But as we already kind of talked about in the past, number 1 versus number 32 in the world, you would expect to see 5, 6, 7 goals for that number 1 ranked team, especially being the U.S. side. So it was definitely a bit disappointing, not capitalizing on more of those scoring chances. And we kind of saw that as a trend throughout the whole group stage. And after the Vietnam game, I think myself and a lot of actual pundits, were cautiously optimistic still. Like, hey, we still dominated possession, still dominated the game in and of itself. Didn't score necessarily as much as we should have, but it'll come. We've seen it come. I'm not really worried about it. We knew, the next game against the Netherlands was going to be tough, but it was something that, Portugal's a very new up and coming side. I believe they may actually be ranked below Vietnam because they are so new or right in that tier with Vietnam.
Portugal's 21st.
It was something that I think Vietnam's like 32. So relatively in the same ballpark, especially again when it comes to women's soccer. It is a little bit, the tiers are a little bit more spread apart. So it was something that I thought, and a lot of people thought, we're warming up, we're kind of getting used to playing in Australia, New Zealand this time of year is a little bit unique due to the weather and all those sorts of things. I was always kind of like, all right, it stinks, but like we'll be fine. It was kind of a little bit of that American ignorance, like this is the U.S. women's national team. We'll pedal to the metal, and maybe we'll beat Netherlands again like we did in the past, and we should handle Portugal comfortably. But I do think the Vietnam game, looking back, was a pretty big precursor to what we were going to see in those next 2 games.
Moving on to the next game, it's the 1-1 draw versus the Netherlands, who, the Netherlands was the number 2 team in the group. I think they're number 9 in the FIFA rankings. Kind of one of those, not Scandinavian, but Northern European teams that are just really good at women's soccer and have always invested more in it than the Portugals of the world. But it's a country that always seems to be good at women's sports, whether it's field hockey or soccer or what may have you. So we held the Netherlands to 1 shot on frame, which is a big deal because the Netherlands is actually athletically almost on par with our women, which is something you see in the Women's World Cup a lot.
Tough to
Yeah,
say.
you see pictures of our girls up against the Vietnam girls, and the height difference. I mean, it's a foot or more in some places, and just the athleticism is far outmatched for the U.S.'s opponents. That's not necessarily the case with the Netherlands, and they were able to really limit the U.S.'s dominance athletically. Not to be repetitive, but you still have a really close game against an opponent that's tough, but not the toughest opponent that the U.S. is going to see. So you would have liked to definitely see the team get a win there. The officiating was questionable, and
to say the least, especially in that like 35th to like 55th, 60th, whenever Lindsey Horan had her goal, there was a lot. It was getting dicey. It was awesome. Yeah. It was like that aggressiveness that I think women's sports doesn't get enough credit for a lot of times. It was incredibly entertaining.
Girls
I think
can be mean
of,
sometimes.
A lot of people who only follow men's soccer and don't really give women's soccer a chance call it dull or boring or doesn't have that aggression in it. And this game had all of that. From a bystander's point, this was a phenomenal game to watch. From an American perspective, it was frustrating. It was literally the only shot on goal we gave up all group stage, and we gave up a goal. And we put plenty of shots on frame, had plenty of chances, but once again, that reoccurring theme, we just weren't really able to finish. I think Lindsay's goal was awesome to watch, and you could almost kind of feel it building up. Got really chippy with her. I'm not going to attempt to say her last name, but the Dutch girl that she plays, her plays with at Lyon. It was a really weird situation with the official too. The official like made them come together afterwards and like apologize and shake hands and like hug it out, which was a really weird thing to see on the World Cup stage. You could see they had no interest in doing it. And Lindsay just kind of went through the motions. Fine, I'll do it, but I'm going to bury one on you. And literally the set piece off of the foul that she drew from her teammate, she scored on. Set pieces, honestly, overall in this game looked really good, which I did not feel from the Vietnam game. There were numerous corners from that Rapinoe took in that Vietnam game that were really, really poor attempts. But there were quite a few set pieces that we looked really good on offensively. Didn't have to defend as many set pieces. And that's another theme that once we jump into the Sweden preview, I'll kind of highlight. So I'm still a little wary on our defensive set pieces. But offensively from set pieces, we looked really good against Netherlands. Overall, a 1-1 draw was disappointing, but actually watching the match and looking at the statistics of the match, we did play pretty well. It just once again comes back to that lack of finishing in that final third, or really in the box even. We had plenty of chances in the box and just weren't able to finish them. So that's one that when the group finished, that draw was incredibly crucial. Not being able to knock off the Netherlands when we did not dominate the game, but look really, really good throughout the vast majority of that game. Not coming away with a win really put us behind the 8 ball. And I think those questions started to creep in more. Like, we only had 4 goals in 2 games. That's really uncommon for the U.S. women's national team in group play. So that theme, man, yes, it was a rematch of the 2019 finals, but it was still a side that normally as a U.S. women's national team observer or fan, if you will, it's a game you really would expect us to win.
Yeah. Moving on to the second draw of the group stage. This is kind of the one that was talked about the most and probably ended up being the most crucial. Portugal, like you've mentioned, kind of a newer player on the Women's World Cup stage. Neither of us watched this game live. I think it was at like 4 or 5 a.m.
It was 3 a.m. my time, I think. So that wasn't happening.
I
got my alarm set for tomorrow's game. I got my alarm set for tomorrow's 5 a.m. Eastern kick, but I wasn't doing a 3 a.m. game like that. That's asking too much. I don't even know if I would have done it for a men's game, to be perfectly honest with you. That's just too much to ask. So yeah, neither of us watched this live. So I do feel a little weird diving too deep into it, but I did watch some extended highlights. I think you did as well. So we'll try and touch on it briefly, but we'll probably move on to Sweden here.
I think
quick.
The biggest thing for me in this one was just it kind of solidified that a problem moving forward, and the problem that we've seen previewed is the lack of clinical finishing sometimes that we've seen from the United States women in the past. you have the 6-0 shots on goal. You have the overall kind of theme of dominance throughout the game. Although Portugal, I would say we dominated this one less even than the Netherlands game, kind of from what I saw and what I read. But just the lack of clinical finishing in front. Sophia Smith, she had a really good first game and then missed some chances in the second 2 games. So you're going to have to capitalize on those chances if you want to beat the likes of Sweden, and then Japan is waiting in the wings, and then Spain potentially later on. So that's kind of what I picked up from this game.
Yeah, I think one thing, there's 2 other points I kind of want to touch on. I think Alex Morgan has kind of flown under the radar. I don't know if it's because of her past success or her commercial success, but I feel like she hasn't had as many completely blatant missed opportunities as Sophia Smith or Rapinoe or even Lindsay in that third game. But if she's supposed to be like this world-class forward that the Americans have leaned on, and she's sitting here not really done much, I think that is kind of a concern that's gone under talked about. I'm a huge Alex Morgan fan. It was Mia Hamm and then Alex Morgan were kind of the female soccer players that I've latched onto in the past, and in this World Cup, Lindsey Horan has far surpassed Alex Morgan because she's just looked that much better in the first 2 matches. But in the second match, our midfield,
Alex Morgan is almost 35, so give her a.
She is. But if I'm not letting Rapinoe off the hook for being past her prime, I'm really I feel like I can't let Alex Morgan off the hook either. But our midfield looks super disconnected. I think there were only a couple of occasions where we strung together more than 2 passes in the midfield, and that's a huge concern moving forward, especially harping on that midfield. Rose Lavelle picked up another yellow card. It was her second of group stage, and so she's not going to be able to play in this round of 16 match against Sweden. That's somebody we saw in the last World Cup come up very huge a couple of times when the team really needed a little bit of kind of that lightning bolt, whether it was actually scoring a goal or just kind of creating and making opportunities. So I think not having her moving forward is going to be really tough. The last thing I have on this is, as I touched on, Carly Lloyd's comments right immediately after this game. Pretty much the comments I woke up to were just an overall sense of disappointment in our contentness and our pride almost in advancing second out of this group. They were dancing, taking photos, having fun. Like it looked like a party because we advanced off of 2 draws and a win over Vietnam, which is just not what this U.S. women's national team has ever been about in the past. It was always kind of step on the throat a little bit, really bury teams and really assert dominance. And I think we had a lot of opportunities to do that in the group stage, and we didn't. And I think that's where a lot of that concern comes from for me moving forward and some of those pundits like Carly Lloyd. With that being said, with the parity that's come into women's football, advancing is obviously still an accomplishment. When Germany and Brazil don't do it and you do it, it's certainly something to be proud of and look to move forward with, and not beat yourself up that you finished second, because it is getting a lot more tightly compact as far as ability and skill on the field. But it's something that if you really want to be the best of the best, you're not dancing and celebrating. Like the first thing that popped in my head, now Brazil's not the number, they might currently be the number 1 team. I'm not sure, but I kind of compare the U.S. women's national team to Brazil as far as cachet and continual success on the international level. You would not have seen Brazil doing the samba out there after a draw against a side like the U.S., for example. Decent comparison there on the men's side, just to advance in second out of their group. Like you just wouldn't have seen that. So I think that's where a lot of that frustration is coming from the likes of Carly Lloyd and some of those past players that like, all right, cool, we advanced. You can be happy you advanced, but like, let's reel it in and really start to focus. And I think, like you said, with Rapinoe and some of her comments, it seems like that focus could possibly be a little bit better. And that could be part of why we're not seeing that clinical finishing and that pure dominance we're used to.
Yeah. I kind of look at it with 2 sides to the coin. I think one is everything you just said. And then 2, I don't know where I saw it. It might have been on TikTok, but the taking pictures with fans, all that seems normal to me, especially if it's your fans that have come over to Australia to watch you in the World Cup. The dancing for me is what was really weird. But I'm not going to pretend like I know what was going through their heads. Like you said, Germany,
Right.
Canada, who's the other one that didn't advance that I'm missing? Brazil. Yeah.
Italy.
Yeah. I mean,
too.
I'm kind of at a loss for words because I don't know how to feel about it. Not because it's like just so absurd to me, but there are several things to take into consideration to play the devil's advocate against Carly Lloyd. But I also understand as a former captain, a legendary U.S. Women's National Team player that's seen your girls and your former teammates and your current teammates kind of have that attitude. I think it's very different than what she's seen in the past, because the U.S. hasn't always been this dance on the field sort of,
Right.
high and mighty character. I think a lot of it has to do with their last 2 World Cups. But it's something that we won't really know how it affects them and their mindset until this Sweden game. So the verdict for me is still out on the dancing and the mindset and all that. If they can really buckle down, then
if we beat Sweden, I couldn't care less. Like if we knock off the number 2 team in the world in the round of 16, all is good. We got one of our toughest knockout stage matches out of the way. Like again, I couldn't care less about the dancing, but in the here and now, it does raise some kind of concerns about that competitive edge, that fire that we're kind of used to seeing with this side.
Dancing when you advance out of the group, fine, but after a draw to a team that's far inferior to you is a little bit questionable to me. But moving on to the Sweden game, from what I've read about Sweden, they're another one of those teams that can match us physically and on the
if not better,
on the measurable side. It's a tall team, athletic team. They like to isolate your center backs. They're going to press you, make you play the ball the full length of the field. They're going to be able to match you on set pieces. If not, like you said, have the edge on you on have the edge over you on set pieces. Excuse me. They're tall and they want to play the long ball, run into channels and cross the ball into the box. Only 2 run of play goals that, there's been like a build up into the box and clinical finishes. The rest have been off set pieces and crosses into the box off the head. So it'll be interesting to see how the game plays out tactically, which I think is something a lot of U.S. Women's National Team fans have been frustrated with throughout this World Cup, is some of the tactical decisions. I don't know what our best style of play is for this team, so I'm not going to criticize it, but it seems to me like you're going to have some sort of plan that works against Sweden and not just be able to rely on dominating them. You're not going to win 28-0 shots on goal.
Right. No, that certainly is not happening. It's much more likely to be the least, even if we win, I think this would probably be our second least dominating performance, if not third, just in the run of play style. One thing that I've seen a lot of, and again, we're not tactical experts on the U.S. Women's National Team. We're just trying to keep it all concise for you as best we can and give you the quick hitters. But they love to attack down the right, which means as of our formation and lineup that we've put out there so far, puts a lot of pressure on Crystal Dunn, who has not looked very good this World Cup. So like you said, I think a lot of it is going to be a tactical game plan that maybe we switch the lineup around. I've seen a lot of talk about moving Julie Ertz to the 6 so she can kind of assist that back line, but give some of that relief moving the ball forward, because we will likely have to score more in the run of play than off of any set pieces because they are so good in the air. So I do think that's going to be kind of an interesting layer to moving forward in this match. And obviously the other one that I already touched on is no Rose Lavelle. I think that's another reason moving Ertz to the 6 might be an interesting concept because we will kind of need some of that assistance in the midfield. So Julie Ertz, for those of you that don't know, typically a center back by trait, but a very good ball playing center back, does have the ability to play the 6 and that kind of that central defending midfielder position. And I think that would be an interesting concept. I don't know if we'll do it because we have had so much success with her playing at the center back position. But it is an interesting concept that I've seen floated around there that might help alleviate some of that midfield presence we might be missing from Rose Lavelle. Not that she's a physically dominating presence by any means, but she's so good tactically on the ball and finding those outlets that maybe moving Julie forward and putting some of that responsibility on her would be helpful.
Yeah, and looking ahead past Sweden, the road certainly doesn't get easier for the United States women's team. They've got Japan waiting if they beat Sweden, who is ranked 11th in the world, but has looked by far the most dominant in this World Cup, like by far. I think they beat Spain like 5-0 or something like that, who's I think number 6 in the world. They haven't allowed a goal yet, or I guess they just did in their knockout stage game, but that's a team who the U.S. did they play them in the Olympic final like 5-6 years ago, or was it the World Cup final?
Yeah,
2 times ago.
12. I think the Olympic final in London. I think we played Japan because it was shortly after the devastating earthquake there. Which I think coincided with the London Olympics. So I believe it was the London Olympics. But yeah, they're certainly a team that's had quite a bit of international success. Yeah. So while knocking off the number 2 team in the world in the round of 16 would feel like a huge accomplishment, it's not like you have some walkover game in that quarterfinals. Yeah. It would certainly still be a tall task. And again, we just really put ourselves behind the 8 ball by having such a mediocre at best group stage play, and I think it could come to bite us in the butt. Full disclosure, I really don't expect us to beat Sweden. I do think their ability on set pieces and their physical presence is something that's going to give us a lot of headaches.
If I wake up at 4 a.m. to watch us lose, I am going to be pretty upset.
Yeah, right. No, see, and that's where the embarrassment and the
if it was at noon, I wouldn't be as mad, but
you could get over it a little bit. Yeah, it would certainly be disappointing. But that again, that's no disrespect to Sweden. They're a really, really formidable side. I personally don't necessarily expect us to win. I think our best chance might be going to penalties, honestly, the way we've looked. And that is not something that I've ever thought I would say in a round of 16 game for the U.S. women, because we do normally have such a dominating presence. But I've seen nothing finishing wise that leads me to believe this is going to be a cakewalk by any means.
Yeah, you got anything else?
No. We better friggin' win if I got a 4:30 alarm to watch us play Sweden. That's all I got.
That's fair enough. Guys, let us know your thoughts in the comments. And I'm sure we'll do a recap episode on this after the Sweden game sometime next week. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, duet, stitch, all those things. And we'll talk to y'all next time. Thanks for watching.